Good day, welcome back. This is the next video I'm doing on chess stats, which are videos something to do with statistics and chess, but not much to do with the game of chess itself. And what I'm looking at today is this whole famous or infamous evaluation of chess pieces, 1, 3, 3, 5, 9, for pawn, knight, bishop, rook, and queen, respectively. Maybe you can add a 4 on the end for the king. And I'm doing this partly because there was a recent great video on Perpetual Chess podcast with the AlphaZero one, and they talked a bit about where these numbers came from. And I'm basically doing a bit of a literature review, I guess is one way of looking at it for myself, to sort of go through some of the things which were discussed, the way the numbers came about from the earliest times and the way they got refined and the sorts of factors people were looking at and sort of the relevance today. And that's basically what I'm going to do. Okay, so what we might start off with, we'll just go to the capture screen. If you want to look at a bit of this yourself, there are two very important websites to look at. One of them will be the Wikipedia page, which we've got there, so we can see it. Chess piece relative value, you can see there 1, 3, 3, 5, and 9. And I think what's important here, as we'll go through it, we'll see that all the people get mentioned. And we're going to go into a couple of them and have a look at how we can sort of have a look at how these people did it or where the source material is and all that sort of stuff, which personally I find a quite interesting little project to be. First of all, you got the modernist school with Lolli. We'll get on him in a second. We'll have a look at what he came up with, and then you can move through time, and then you get some English writers, and then you get Lasker, and then Kaufman does a lot of work. So we'll just sort of just summarize what we're going to be looking at. Read this at your own leisure. Here we go. Here's the table they have in Wikipedia. Sarrat, Philidor. Obviously, Philidor is before Sarrat, if you think about it, and Pratt is actually earlier than Sarrat, so we'll sort of go into that. There are sort of a couple of people to look at. And then you got Lasker, and obviously a lot of people, Irv and Fisher and Capablanca, everybody came up with their versions of these numbers. And then more recently, you've got Kaufman and Berliner doing quite a lot of work on it. I think that gets discussed a little bit below. And then you've got the AlphaZero interpretation. You can see that 3, 3, 5.6, 9.5. Well, it's not too far off. So, it's all kind of interesting. And then Larry Kaufman's system, I think I will just mention this briefly because what he actually does is he sort of categorizes it. Is it middle game or end game or, only one side is a queen? And then you add on the bishop pair bonuses. These are themes which come through. But basically, game phases have different valuations, and particularly for the pawns. And then we can scroll down a bit. And Berliner's system, I think he actually did a bit of work on, what the pawns are, isolated, connected, passed, doubled, and so on, and you actually get a bit more granularity. So obviously there's, it's like layers of the onion, you can sort of go into it deeper and deeper. Okay, so that is the Wikipedia page, and that goes on. Fairy pieces, okay, fine. Then the other page, well worth a look at, which I basically has helped to guide this sort of little investigation, is Edward Winter on chesshistory.com. The value of the chess pieces, it is what it says. Mentions some Hoyle's one, which is total garbage, and then it goes on. There's Pratt in 1803, and then Staunton. Many, many examples, different formulas, different equations. So this is the number actually here, the 1, 3, 8.05, 3.5, 5.48, 9.04 comes up a few times. Quite interesting. Well worth a read. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but you get an idea of this. Sort of shows the way different famous people have written about it and come up with their own variations. We're going to do a little bit of that. So that I say at your own sort of leisure, go and look at those two websites. Okay, now so we're going to start at the start, right? Which is a very good place to go. And then if you go back to Wikipedia, it mentions Lolli. So basically, Lolli, I think he's pretty famous for having a line in the or an alternative in the fried liver. Yeah, 2 knights defense, e45, knight f3, knight f6, knight f6, knight g5, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5. Rather than sacking the knight straight away, you play d4. Okay, so you can see 1698 to 1769, lived a long time ago, and he wrote this book, Observation, Theory, Practice, Game of Chess, Theoretical, Practical Views on the Game of Chess. Supposedly, he's come up with some piece valuations and the thing as well. How will we check that? Right, so this is a microcosm of what you might do for other books. I found it quite interesting. I started off doing it a little bit differently. First of all, how do we get that book? Some books you can get, some books you can't get. If you search for that and you name and put PDF on the end, you will come up with this. Google has scanned in a lot of old chess books, and you can read them. It's in Italian, so I can't read it. But absolutely amazing. I've scanned this chess book in. It's all there. So what do we do then? We download it. Now, what you can do is I download, you go to this button here, can you see it? You download, and you download as EPUB, because EPUB actually includes some text material in it, not just a scan, whereas PDF, when I've done it to download, just a PDF. You've downloaded, you've got EPUB, and then what do you do with that? It's Italian, and it's a sort of document reader, so you still can't read it, and you want to translate it. Now, the manual way of translating it, which I tried a bit, and I'd quite like to do it as sort of a workflow. You effectively have to split the EPUB up into individual pages, and then you scan it in, and if you've got the text, you don't need to, but if you don't have the text, you've got an OCR, Tesseract or something, and then once you've done that, then you have to translate it, and there are different translation tools. However, you say, well, why the hell do you do that? Because you can just pop a document, which I've already done, into Google Translate and translate it for you, and you come back and you get a download, which is what I've done. And then if we have a look at the download, then you can search through and read Lolli's document in English. So that's just sort of the process. Sorry, talking so much about it, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing. So now, basically, if you are able to get a sort of a scanned copy of an old chess book and you want to read what the guy said, well, this is the way to do it. Now, the problem with some of the old chess books, they have poems and stories and all sorts of things in them which don't make a lot of sense, right? But however, once you got the text, you can search for the word value, which what I've done, and you come up with this section here. And it's not the only bit, but this is kind of sort of summarizes it all in sort of one little page for you. One little paragraph. The rook is valued at 6 points. Well, it's a rook. Each minor piece is 4. Exchange of 2 minor pieces for a rook should not be made. Well, we kind of know that anyway. Obviously, the values were used a little bit different. And he seems to overvalue the queen. The queen, he reckons the queen's worth 2 rooks and a pawn. Well, obviously, nowadays, I think we tend to think of 2 rooks, queen, and a pawn, depending upon the environment or situation on the board. So that gives you 6 times 2 plus 1, 13. So he's come up with a sort of a scale which is quite a bit different from what you would expect. So doesn't really go into how he came up with those. Maybe there is text around. Haven't had a chance to read the full document, but that's sort of, there we go. That's what Lolli says. Now what we might do, let me see if my Excel is showing my chart. Yeah, here we go. Right. So what I've done is I have, drag it out of the way, down there. Basically, I've just got all those lines in Wikipedia page, and we put the numbers in, and you can see that the top line, value of a queen. So this is that 13, which Lolli had. Nobody else has a value that high. Most people have that 9 to 10 range, fairly stable. Rook, 5, fairly stable, and the 2 pieces between 3 and 4. So actually, the assessment hasn't changed a lot through time. As I say, you get these refinements for different times of the game and all that sort of stuff. One thing which we'll get onto, you have a look at all these guys. We'll have a look at a couple of them, but this is Stockfish. This is the last Stockfish, which we're still using, like sort of hand-grafted evaluation procedure. It actually, you have to scale it back. It gives fairly high values for the pieces, but when you look at the overall evaluation, then it starts adjusting. Piece values might get dragged back for poor location, and pawn values might be pushed up because they're in a good position. So, but if you scale a pawn down to 0.7, I think it is, then actually you can see that the queens and the rooks and the knight and the bishop are all kind of, where you expect them to be. Okay, so that's kind of the overview on that, and we've looked at Lolli, and the next one we're going to look at, because as I say, this is kind of, as I say, literature review, sorry about that, we're going to now look at, now Pratt was a little bit easier to get, and it's Studies of Chess. That's 1803. He seems to have taken a lot of Philidor's material, and if you look at the viewer here, it's like Studies of Chess, William Jones. Well, it's got a poem by William Jones, seems to be his only sort of contribution. And then now we're going straight to those pages which were highlighted on the Edward Winter Chess Notes page, the first scale of the powers. And this is quite interesting to see how people first thought about it. And actually, it's very, very modern, right? So first scale of powers, page 79. So the idea was that basically how much mobility do the pieces have on their best square, right? And you can see the knight needs a little bit of explaining, but the other ones basically see that's the number of squares they would control, king, 8 around it and the 1 on it type of thing. So the value of the piece except the pawn, king, commensurate with the power. So that's what they're defining powers as. And then the next step is, well, actually that is the maximum, but what about like more of an average? So this is the second scale of powers. In play, the probability of their occupying any given square is equal. Their powers will be blah, blah, blah. And the pawn, obviously, if it's on the 7th rank, has a chance of becoming a queen. So then you give that a bit more value. And then so you get this assessment. It's looking like 4.5 for knight and bishops and rooks and things, 7.5. So maybe at the pieces are a bit higher value versus pawns on his scale, but that's sort of the way of thinking about it. Now, they're saying equal probability. In reality, we know that knights often don't end up in corner squares, and then you can think, oh, okay, well, let's start adjusting that for the actual normal sort of positions of the pieces on average. And you can see this also in the sort of the piece tables in chess engines, where they assign higher values for certain pieces if they're closer to the center of the board. Let's keep going on this guy's scale of powers. And then because the knight is special, it can attack the queen without being counterattacked. You can jump over things. He gave it an extra value of 3, which is where that 12 came up with. And that's the end of that little section where he does his valuation. In there somewhere is those numbers: 1, 3.05, 3.5, 5.48, and 9.94. Whether it came from Pratt or it came from Philidor, seems to be sort of the same sort of thing. And it is very sort of scientific numbers based on the mobility of the pieces. See, the bishop's a bit more mobile than the knight, and so on. So that's where we've moved on to Pratt. And the next guy we're going to have a look at is Sarat. Have a look at this, because J.H. Sarat, not so much because I couldn't actually find the talk about values in here, which he gets mentioned in Excel. Sarat is there with 3.1, 3.35, and 7.9. I couldn't actually find those numbers, but so other than that, I did find this really fascinating, because basically this is a window into those books by Damiano and Roy Lopez and Salvia, obviously big names from the past. And Sarah has basically just summarized or plagiarized or something. And you had a chance to read these books, well worth the read. And it's also, there's a lot of material about other sort of names from the past, which we only hear about in passing. If you go down, Damiano, Lopez, about the other guys, Paolo Boy and Il Putino and a few other people. So it's actually a really good capture of history, actually. And I think later books by English writers such as Lewis probably use some of this material, but this is a really good good source for the early chess material if you're interested in that. What we're going to move on to now is Lasker. Now, Lasker is going to be differently. I've got the PDF, and if we go to here, just bring up the page. Lasker's chess primer, and he talks about sort of his assessments, and then he's come up with, at the bottom of the page there, you can see his valuations. A knight is 3 pawns, bishop is equal to knight, a rook is equal to knight plus 2 pawns, it's 5. A king's knight plus a pawn is 4, and this is where queen is 2 rooks or 3 knights. Okay, that's where you get this, is it 9 or is it 10? But that's the sort of Lasker's one. I think we can say that's probably one of the earlier examples of these sort of rounded down. They're the numbers you go for. Some people put 9, some people pick 10. Okay, so I think that's sort of the literature review. And if we go back to Excel briefly, you can see that after that we've had, with Lasker's there, of Horowitz, Turing even, Evans, all these people coming up with different suggestions. And then now later on we get more onto the engine side of it. So let's just have a look at the AlphaZero interpretation based on games played and its assessment of the piece values. And that also gets attributed to Kramnik, I believe. Let's just have a look at that document. Okay, here we are, the article by Demis Hassabis. He's the guy to DeepMind. I think Google took them over, and Vladimir Kramnik's input. And if you have the DeepMind guys, I mean, obviously they do a lot of really amazing stuff. AlphaGo, AlphaZero. This is a very complicated looking article as you go through it, lots of charts, lots of different things. And what we want to look at is, once again, you can just download this. Very simple, very straightforward. Okay, piece values. And they've done all sorts of different types of chess. Knight 3, bishop 3.3, rook 5.6, queen 9.5. Okay, that's very close, and that's kind of the values. And that's the idea, that if you think of assessment of chess position, all other things being equal, then that's sort of the values you'd assign to the pieces on average. What I want to do now, let's just close that, is we can sort of do a little bit of this ourselves, which is partly what I was also trying to get at, right? Is that we can use the older version of Stockfish. I showed you the numbers there, use the heuristic evaluation, put values into the pieces, all that sort of stuff, right? But now they're using, for the evaluation step, neural network, and you can do exactly almost what the AlphaZero guys have done, although that was self-play. But you can imagine feeding all these chess games in and doing an assessment and just saying, well, given that the neural network has been trained on however many millions of positions, you could do the same with Leela as well, right? what does Stockfish think the pieces are worth? And so that's what I've done, and we'll have a quick look at what numbers drop out the bottom of that. Okay, here we are at the capture screen. Now I'm going to carve this out into a separate video because I haven't got the results I want and have to do a little bit more work on it. Anyway, but what we're looking at is we've got Stockfish, and if you look at Stockfish, and use the command line, and what I want to look at is this command eval. You can see what it does is for the given board position, it gives you an evaluation of the value for each piece. Starting position, rooks are 5, queen's 10, queen's 8, queen's 10, right? Anyway, so you get those sorts of numbers. And what I had been doing was just doing a loop in Python JS, going through a game, feeding the position into Stockfish, and then running this eval command, getting the numbers out, and then working out what the piece is worth. This is, let's say that's a lightweight version of what DeepMind did with their piece evaluation. Or another way of thinking about it, the Kaufman work is probably the gold standard in terms of people doing it. You try and work out the value of the pieces from sort of game experience rather than sort of a heuristic approach. And I did actually come up with some numbers which I'm not very happy with. It's a big spreadsheet. So this was all only about 100 games because I've got to work something out. And you can see the queens are quite undervalued, 7.5, 7.8. Rook 6, not too bad. Bishop 5, but black bishop 5, knights around about 5, and the pawns. Oh, that would have to be scaled by the pawns a little bit, right? Which then probably 4.8 divided by 1.4, you get a more reasonable number. But the problem is that then that drags the queen value down even more. And then I was doing the same thing that Kaufman did. Black bishop pair, white bishop pair, both queens on the board, no queens on the board, and one queen on the board. You can see that one queen on the board. He categorized those things. Anyway, so that's just the start. I can't finish that now. And as I say, the queen values were unreasonably low. And actually, when I was looking at it, sometimes the queen value comes at 3. And I think the way I'm doing it is that eval function sometimes returns value to 3 because the queen is about to be captured, for instance, right? And while the queen's about to be captured, is probably not worth a lot. So obviously, I've got to refine the way I look at it. My idea is to sort of come up with some sort of just to understand how the sort of the Google numbers come about. What I thought I would close out with was quite interesting if you think about it. And while we're here, you can just quickly see I forgot to show this is in Stockfish 11, 12, and there's this file types.h, which they're the handcrafted values of the pawns and the pieces. What I wanted to close out then is kind of an assessment of how people performed during time. Now, I'll just point out here, there's this assessment here, 3.05. We'll come back to 3.5, 5.5, 9.9. Philidor, says Philidor. You get this little note here. Can you see that? Yeah. In the 1817 edition of Philidor Studies of Chess, the editor Pratt gives the same values. So that was the document we were looking at earlier, owned by William Jones, by Philidor, and edited by Peter Pratt. You can see there, right? So it's all the same thing. And Staunton agrees. So we got Staunton Chess Player's Handbook, a later book. He notes that piece values are dependent on the position on the phase of the game. I just experienced that. So we have these values. Now, the idea is how accurate all these different people cover all these different numbers. And we can go back to my Excel capture screen and we find that. And yeah, that's what I've done. And I've done the squared percent difference of the values and added them up. And the very funny thing here is that the most accurate one, in fact, you can probably see it more clearly if we take out, we'll just get rid of the Lolli one for a second, because the Lolli one was a bit wacky. And you can see Philidor and Pratt are put in the same values. Those are the guys who had the most accurate assessments. So, his thumb in the air at 3 points to the knight and all this sort of thing, and that assessment of, the mobility and the average mobility and all that sort of thing, which is the way we think about it. It's actually more accurate than anybody else has come up with. A lot of the inaccuracy of other people is based on trying to account for specific positions, extra assessment of the phase of the game or the board, or just rounding. In fact, rounding probably causes more errors than anything else. But you can see that it's quite it's humbling to think that here are the numbers they'd come up with more than 200 years ago, and look how they compare to what I'm viewing as the gold standard here, the AlphaGo numbers. The knight value was perfect. Bishop was out by 0.17 of a point. Rook about the same, 0.15, and then the queen's out by 0.44. But when you compare it to anybody else, it's actually was better. Very funny. So that was just a bit of tour. I said my idea is to look maybe a bit more at the coding side as time progresses and try and come up with, like my sort of AlphaGo estimate, and we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.